Hey, what's up? Oh, excuse me. Hi, how are you? My name is Kyla, and I'm here to talk about how AAVE and African American Vernacular English affects the Black community, or at least how society's perception of it does. Language is beautiful. There are many languages and varieties of language across the world. We use language to communicate our feelings, emotions, and even culture, which is often embedded into our language. How then would a denial of someone's language affect them? Growing up, I was taught that there was a correct and incorrect way of speaking. In my household, what is known as AAVE was usually degraded in speech and labeled as ghetto or ignorant. I would even look down on people who used it, people who looked just like me. There's one time in particular, though, that stands out to me. It was towards the end of a class period in my 12th grade year of high school. I was getting my things together to leave when I overheard a fellow classmate speaking with our teacher. It makes me sad to admit this, but I cringed so hard as soon as she started speaking. All I could hear were grammatical errors and terms that I thought were disrespectful to use with someone like a teacher. I judged her. I thought she was, in a way, ignorant because she spoke incorrectly. In that moment, I viewed her as lesser than. But in actuality, as I got to know her, I found out that she was very intelligent, lively, and had many great ideas about people and the world around her. Later on, I even began to admire her because she was not afraid to speak as herself. Luckily, our teacher wasn't like me. But what if she was? What if she was like Mrs. Wright, a teacher highlighted in an article written by Rita Coley? You see, Mrs. Wright was approached by a student named Eddie. He spoke a lot like my classmate. The article brings out that one day during his lunch break, Eddie went up to Mrs. Wright and asked, "Hey, Mrs. Wright, I don't got no lunch money. Can I sit in your room and use the computer?" Mrs. Wright immediately responded, "I'm not going to answer that question until you speak correctly. How can we say that in proper English?" Eddie then calmly replied, "Maybe not in your house, but in my house, that is how we speak correctly." In her article, Coley continues to explain that this experience made her realize that although differences exist in the structure of AAVE and standard English, she and others in her school were actually teaching a hierarchy of those differences. So by stating that Eddie needed to use proper English, Mrs. Wright was asserting that the English that Eddie was taught to speak at home was inferior to what he was learning in school. There was an assertion that Eddie's language and dialect were not simply different, but deficient. Sadly, this belief is interwoven within our classrooms, leaving many students to feel the need to code switch. Code switching is the practice of alternating between two or more languages or varieties of language in conversation. In a more informal sense of the term, code switching is what happens when people change up how they speak or express themselves. AAVE speakers usually abandon AAVE in a more formal setting. A study highlighted in an article written by Lisa Coach noted that some African Americans take on a more negative view of those who exclusively use AAVE, like I myself did. But why is that? Why was I so uncomfortable and judgmental towards my classmate? Well, the study showed that stereotypes surrounding AAVE as an inferior language spoken by ignorant or lazy people has fueled this perspective. I thought so little of my classmate because I allowed society's perspective that was created by stereotypes to become my own. I thought her language differences made her deficient. Would Eddie have eventually felt the same way about his own family if he upheld that belief that his family's way of speaking was in some way inferior? Likely, yes. Therefore, we must educate ourselves on the effect stereotypes have on our own view of languages and the people who use them. In our classrooms, teachers must be aware of how and when they choose to teach a student about what is known as the standard English. being careful not to undermine their students. There's still an important question to ask though. Are these beliefs and stereotypes well-founded? Is AAVE really just a reject or broken English? That is what some believe, but based on its origin, it is something completely different from the standard English. It began to develop around 1619 when slaves were brought to America from Africa. AAVE developed from contact between speakers of West African languages, contact with Caribbean Creole, and their English-speaking slave masters. It became a symphony of language that endured because of the separation of Blacks from slavery and then segregation, even having its own grammatical structure. However, not all African Americans speak AAVE, and not all AAVE speakers are African American. Because of this, when I first started this project, I was uncomfortable with the term AAVE. To me, it's a continuation of the stereotypes that have already been produced. This is especially true when no explanation is provided when speaking about AAVE in the standard English that is often the case. Although I am still grappling with what else these two varieties of English could be called, keeping them within their boxes of AAVE and standard English, which by the way is also called white English, is not an option. For it creates a notion that whiteness is the standard. So I encourage you to dig further into this subject while remembering that languages and varieties of languages are different and never deficient. Thank you.